can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, your brother, and your friend, Rashid, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for giving me another hour of your day and another day of your time. I'd like to thank all of you who took the time out of your day to listen to the show as we wait for K.J Noh to join us on the platform. All right. Shout out to everybody that's watching live, those who will listen later, and those who will download us later. I'm gonna go to the comments real quick because I want to address something until KJ joins us. Okay. So let me go to the shout out to M Sparks in the building. Solidarity, you better believe it. Strong, baby. The Blue Pill Diaries. That's my little boy. That's my son. Shout out to my son, Kasim. Let's see. Let's go down to Chad Franklin. Shout out to Chad Franklin in the building. KJ is always on point. You better believe it. And then he throws this in, which I thank you for that, and I'm humbled. He says, "You too, Rashid." I appreciate that. Red Panda Pie is in the building. Red Panda Pie says, "Hello, everybody." And Red Panda Pie comes back and says, "Okay, the building." So we're going to go from the clip, and this is a treat for not you guys only, but for me also. Every time I get him on the platform, this man is a wealth of information. And I'm telling you, in my opinion, and I've said this multiple times over, when it comes to geopolitics, he has to be in the top 5. This guy is awesome. So I got to bring in my friend and colleague, K.J Noh. How's it going today?
I'm doing well. Good to be with you, Rashid.
KJ, the world, it seems like it's been, since you and I talked last, it seems like it's been turned upside down. We see Donald Trump fabricating intelligence to justify a war against Venezuela, which is and I think is a move to weaken BRICS because of the connection that Venezuela has with the BRICS, and it is also a way to punch at the low-hanging fruit on the tree, to show an example to everybody else that if you go this route of BRICS, we may use some other justification to invade you or bomb you because we're still a preeminent military power. What do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I think definitely it is all about intimidation. It is also punching down, going after low-hanging fruit, picking off the pawns. And also it is definitely a threat against BRICS. Venezuela was the first country actually in Latin America to have relations with China. It started them in 2001. It had a strategic development plan with China. And then starting 2007, they had a joint fund for building infrastructure. So it's been really, really important. It's been China's bridge to Latin America, and the U.S. sees it as low-hanging fruit. It's a socialist inclined state, so they want to punch down, destroy it, take it out, and create as much havoc and pain and suffering as possible. At the same time that they want to send a message to the rest of the global South: don't get any ideas. We're still capable of, genocidal violence.
Do you think that this is exposing the desperation in the American military? Because it seems like when people become desperate, they become irrational. And what's rational in their head is not rational to the rational people who are on the outside looking in. And then the rational people look at it and say, hey, we've got to find a way around this irrational logic and this irrational policy from this person right here. So do you think that because they're losing their position, they're losing their sway, they're losing their economic domination, their technological advantages, and everything that they've thrown up against the wall has not stuck. Do you think this is causing them to be irrational and illogical in their military and geopolitical plans?
Yeah, well, they've always been irrational, illogical, and violent, but it's just going up another notch. So just even more irrational. And that irrationality and desperation is like that of an addict who can't get their fix. The empire is addicted to power. And as they see their power draining away, and waning, they become more and more frantic. They become more and more violent, and they will do anything. It's like that addict, that will steal their drugs out of their, sick grandmother's purse, regardless of the fact that it will kill them. They don't care. And so that kind of desperation, that violence, that school shooter mode that the U.S. is in, I think is absolutely on point. And I also want to point out that the head of Southcom, the admiral that is responsible for the Southern Command, was fired well, he wasn't fired, but he quote unquote resigned, right? He's ending his tenure at the end of the year after just 1 year. That is extraordinary. But it seems like he was opposed to the, extra legality of these, random, pirate murders of, people just on boats. And so now he's out the door. But it looks like the U.S. is continually escalating. We have the USS Ford, which is in theater. You have thousands and thousands of troops. We also hear, the CIA, and also there's work to do counterinsurgency. But all of this, despite what it looks like, despite the threat, the threatening posture, I think is a signal of weakness. And what it signals is the U.S. knows that it cannot go toe-to-toe against Russia or China or possibly even Iran. We'll see. That's still a developing situation. But we know that the United States is not really capable of peer combat unless it goes immediately nuclear. And so because of that, it's punching down, it's looking for easy targets. It is going after, on the chessboard, it's going after the pawns, the isolated pawns, because thinking it can clear out the chessboard and then regroup and come back with more aggressive actions. But I don't know how successful it will be. Venezuela is not going to be a pushover. They're not going to be able to walk over Venezuela. One, because it's a huge territory. The country is prepared. I believe that there are large sectors that are strongly unified, and it's both mountainous and jungle. And the U.S. does not do well in mountainous or jungle, war theaters. And so I think it's a big mistake, and I think they're in for a lot of surprises. And I think that both Russia and China are quietly behind the scenes supporting, but we'll see.
But doesn't Venezuela have S-300 air defense systems and the Bastion coastal defense systems, along with some I think not MiGs but Su-30s fighter jets? I know that they have been building out their military. Certainly, it's not a peer competitor with the United States. Very recently, I think in 2023, they were delivered Chinese anti-ship missiles, and these are not, these are nothing to trifle with. And of course, the larger picture is the United States is going to have trouble actually replenishing its stocks, because it already depleted its magazine in Ukraine and on Iran. So it really does have difficulties with materiel. And then to compound that, remember, China has just recently put controls on the export of rare earth elements. Now, rare earth elements, as people are starting to realize, are essential for everything that is electronic. Okay, if you want to think of periods of civilization, we can think of the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, steel during the first phase of industrialization.
Right now, we're looking at, the information era. Everything that's related to high tech electronics and information has rare earth elements in it. Those headphones you are wearing right now have rare earth elements in them. If they didn't have rare earth elements, they would be about 15 times heavier. You'd be having a bowling ball hanging to your ears. And so rare earth elements are extremely essential for everything that is high tech, and certainly everything that is military and high tech: radar, optics, scanning, and navigation systems. It's all rare earth elements. And when China, which has a 99% monopoly on these, says that no more rare earth elements, is certainly no more rare earth elements, because we're trying to prevent proliferation, as we have a right to do under international law. We do not want the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. They're within their legal rights to do that. And that puts an immediate crimp on not only the US weapons production, but it also puts a crimp on actually US industry in general.
Dave, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but Dava 5947 asks this question. Do the election results in Taiwan and Japan change any balances?
Okay, the election results in Japan are still kind of being processed. We have an interesting situation where the ruling LDP party has put forth a female candidate. And, this female candidate is not good news. It's the Ursula von der Leyen. These are hawks. These are ultra hawks. This is a woman who goes to Yasukuni Shrine and worships the war criminals every single year. She's very, very hawkish on China. We don't know the final outcome yet. And even if she does get into power, it could be very, very unstable. But Japan is going through all kinds of challenges. Remember, the LDP is the Liberal Democratic Party. They are the ruling party of Japan. They've had one party rule since 1955, since the United States created them. And they were created, this history is really important. They were created and funded by the CIA in order to prevent any socialist or leftist party in Japan. They were created from a coalition of unrepentant war criminals, organized crime, the Japanese Yakuza, and the military industrialist corporations. This was a coalition of, military industrial bosses, unrepentant war criminals, and organized crime. They came together and built this party called the LDP, which then wiped out any left-leaning tendencies in Japan. And they've had a monopoly on Japanese politics up to the present moment, except for a tiny, tiny moment, tiny glitch. And so this is the uniparty that controls Japanese government that is completely and totally beholden to the United States. It's a vassal party that essentially does the bidding of the United States. And their marching orders starting around 2009, 2010 were get ready for war with China. Okay. And so they started to gut their peace constitution, which was put in by the US anyway, but they gutted their peace constitution. They rewrote, laws so that they could, anywhere where the US goes to war, they can go to war. And they've been increasing their military budget. Pretty soon they will have, I think, the third largest military budget on the planet. They're already the fifth most powerful military, but they will have the third largest military budget on the planet. And during the Biden administration forced the South Koreans to have this military alliance with Japan called JAC, as Japan, Korea, US alliance. It's essentially for the Koreans who were colonized by the Japanese in this brutal fashion. It's like being forced to marry your rapist. But the US brokered this shotgun wedding between Japan and Korea. And all of that is to create this synergy so that they can have this massive force projection platform in East Asia to prepare for war against China.
Now, I want to go back to Venezuela for a second. The United States it seems like they've become so desperate that they're using anything. First when they wanted to attack a nation, it was terrorism. Then it was Al Qaeda. Then it was ISIS, and then it was Boko Haram and Al Sharam and all of these other instruments. Now, any intelligent person knows that the United States has been supposedly fighting narco terrorism for decades and has not eliminated any of that. And J.D. Vance says we don't care if we commit war crimes. Whatever he said, he didn't give a it, and those were, and I'm not using the curse word that he used about what they're doing are war crimes. In Venezuela, they're using drugs as a way to then delegitimize the leadership in Venezuela and in Colombia so that they can justify a military operation. What is the rest of the world saying and thinking about these actions of a depraved former global hegemon?
Well, if you look at the mainstream media, they're just going along. They're just parroting the talking points, right? And they're saying, oh, it's narco terrorism, narco trafficking. We have to do something about it. But anybody who's paying attention knows that this narco trafficking allegation is simply the new WMD lie, right? When we went to war against Iraq, we concocted these lies about WMD, and now that we're accelerating towards war against Venezuela, you need some kind of pretext, a tiny fig leaf, right? Just to make it seem that you're not just immediately waging aggressive war and violating all the rules of the international order. So here you have this kind of tiny fig leaf of a pretext, but it is enough because of the way that the media multiplies it and catapults it and repeats it. Then pretty soon that will be the excuse. Now let's be very, very clear. If you're talking about narco trafficking, narco terrorism, the prime candidate for that laureate is the United States. I mean, the Western imperial powers, they colonized China partially through the trafficking of narcotics. This was the Opium Wars, and they essentially brought China down. I mean, China had 100 million addicts, by the time of the revolution, because the West had engorged and enriched itself through narco trafficking. In fact, the entire system of capitalism is the history of the trafficking of addictive substances, starting with sugarcane, which is refined, becomes a highly addictive substance that was built on slave labor. And then you have things like coffee, tobacco, and etc. These are all highly addictive substances, or they're turned into highly addictive substances. They're refined until they become highly addictive. And then that's great for the capitalist entrepreneurs, because then you build in your own demand. When a substance is addictive, then you've created your own demand. And you see the same thing with the social media companies. The social media companies, they want to create their own demand. So they're designed to be addictive, this constant kind of internal addiction. It's a kind of dopamine fix that you're constantly seeking out. But the history of capitalism is really the history of the manipulation and the trafficking of addictive substances. And so in that context, the primary trafficker of narcotics is the United States. And it's done it specifically in order to fund and finance dirty wars. So it started out in the 1949, 1950s. It started what we refer to as the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia, in particular Myanmar, in order to fund the KMT washouts that were still trying to wage a dirty war against China in Yunnan province on the Myanmar border. They were going to take back, they thought they could fund a dirty war and take back Yunnan province from China after the Chinese Revolution. And then that Iron Triangle also became a key funding source for the dirty wars during the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia, the Southeast Asian wars. They were also funded through trafficking from the Golden Triangle. And then later, once again, this narco trafficking was used to fund the the Contras that were fighting the Nicaraguan Sandinista revolution. Again, that was done under the table. It was financed and supported by the U.S. intelligence agencies, CIA, DEA, and also Taiwan province. Taiwan province was intricately involved in these ugly, dirty, genocidal wars in Latin America. So there is an organization in a country that has a long history of narco trafficking, but from time to time, they will throw out the narco trafficking label as a projection and as a pretext and a casus belli to overthrow governments. For example, Manuel Noriega, CIA asset, but then when they didn't want him, he's a trafficker and narco trafficker, and they take him out and invade the country. So it's a constant, it's a constant recycled trope. So we have to do better. We have to see it, understand it for what it is.
And not only that, they keep Haiti in a state of chaos because that is the center of where the CIA, the MI6, and others traffic cocaine from the west to the east, and opium from the east to the west. So that is a drop-off point there, and they don't want anyone knowing that this is where the CIA gets its private funding. This is where these other alphabet organizations get the extra money. So why do you think that Americans and Westerners live in such a land of denial and delusion, even with all of this information at the tip of their fingers on a computer or on a phone?
They're the most indoctrinated people on the planet. They're the most propagandized, indoctrinated, and brainwashed people on the planet. And part of the reason is, there are many reasons for it. Part of it is they are trained in historical amnesia. They're literally like your grandmother with Alzheimer's who cannot remember what happened 5 minutes ago. That is the U.S. Political system. It's this constant amnesia, this constant, it's this constant, dementia that invades the political landscape. And part of that dementia is created by the sheer force of the indoctrination and the propaganda. You're constantly being blasted by misinformation, disinformation, these days primarily on social media, but before that, on the mainstream media and in the schools. And so you're constantly being barraged with a fire hose of falsehoods. They literally use that term, fire hose of falsehoods. So it just kind of wipes clean everything that you've learned. How many people remember that, the WMD was a fraudulent excuse? How many people remember that, the people were told to believe that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11? Do people have that memory? It's as Gore Vidal, it's the United States of amnesia, right? There's no historical memory and this constant indoctrination. And the US is really, really good at indoctrination and propaganda. In fact, it's really an outcome of the US skill in public relations and advertising. That public relations and advertising techniques, which are incredibly sophisticated, incredibly manipulative. They will get you to believe that fizzy brown sugar water will solve all your problems, right? Right? That a carcinogenic stick, is a sign of virility when it's actually doing the opposite. They're so good at that, and they're so good, and they've turned it into such like a extraordinary skill, and it's been amplified by their control of the internet and all the social media companies, where they can constantly barrage you at the same time that they censor anything that contradicts the message. That's why, Rashid, you only get a few hundred viewers on your incredible shows. You're being banned left, right, and center, and they know that that's what they're doing. But that's how it works. They control the infrastructure, they control the means of production and dissemination, and they have a century and a half's worth of extraordinary skilled manipulation in the domains of advertising and PR that make it so that they are able to manipulate people and at the very least, they don't. All they need to do is confuse you and overwhelm you, and then people will just kind of default to what they're being told daily, day in and out, which is, oh yeah, they just told me that. I was just, that's what CNN told me, and that's what they repeat. So it's effective, but it's horrific.
Yeah, and before we transition to the Middle East and the Ukrainian thing, I want to piggyback off of what you were just saying. Do they? I understand that the level of propaganda is tremendous in America, and I understand that the top tier people use this to stay in power and to promote their goals. But do they, for 1 second, sit back and think that if I dumb down the masses of people is where I'm going to get my future generals, lawyers, teachers, educators, scientists, architects, astronauts, and blah, 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 blah. And how, if we dumb these people down right now for expedient or instant gratification, how will that then play 10, 15, 20 years down the line for the health of the republic or for the nation? Because if you do that, as we can see on an even playing field, and the United States is slashing out because it's losing, you cannot compete with people who have been educated and not propagandized. So do they sit back and think that they are laying thermite at the base of the very republic that they're trying to keep as the global hegemon?
It's a deep contradiction, and the answer is yes and no. I think there's one part of them that really believes that the masses are dumb and they're just simply there to be exploited, manipulated, expropriated, and used. I think that there are elites that think that way, and they also believe that there is a sector of this population, primarily their own kin and kith, that will be that will be that will be exempt from this. So like the Silicon Valley barons, they never give their kids any access to social media or tech devices. They send them to Waldorf schools where they interact with nature and do things with their hands. And then they send them to elite academies like the Ivies, and there in the Ivies they're exposed to all these different things, so they understand what the score really is. But the problem is, along the way, they themselves imbibe a lot of the shit that they're putting out. You're spraying it all day long, you're going to get some back on yourself. And so they start to become high on their own supply. They believe their own idiocy. If you look at people, like the high-ranking leaders of the deep state, the Council on Foreign Relations, you realize that they write at the level of an 8th grader, and they think at the level of a 4th grader, and they've imbibed all of the same lies that they've been telling. They've been telling these lies for so long that they start to believe it themselves. One example is, this notion of brainwashing. This was a trope that was created during the Korean War. And the reason why they created was, the US was doing all kinds of horrific things during the Korean War. Of course, they were carpet bombing. They killed, 4 million people, 1/5 of the population. But also they were using chemical weapons, and they were also using biological weapons that they got from the Japanese. They took the Japanese biological warfare unit 731, and then they gave all of their scientists amnesty so they could create Fort Detrick, which is a U.S. Biowarfare plan. And there's very, very strong evidence, almost incontrovertible evidence, that the U.S. was using biological warfare against North Korea and against China during the Korean War. Ceramic bombs, fleas and insects appearing in the middle of winter, people getting sick from strange diseases. When I was growing up, everybody had to get shots for encephalitis. That was one of the weapons that we think was used. It was encephalitis, cholera. We also had lots of outbreaks of cholera, bubonic plague, etc. So there was clearly biological warfare that was being used. In fact, the hantavirus is probably one of the things that was created during the Korean War. But anyway, what happened was that the Chinese would capture some of these, air crew, and then later these air crew came out and they confessed that they had been waging biological warfare. Well, this was a huge scandal. It was a huge scandal for the United States, and they had to explain how could it be that these red-blooded Americans confessed to such extraordinary war crimes. So they created this myth that the Chinese had subjected them to incredible, intense psychological pressure, that they had actually had to come up with these lies at the cost of total psychological disintegration. They were totally psychologically disintegrated, and then and then the Chinese fed them lines, and then they came up with these horrific notions. And therefore the Chinese had unpacked the secret of brainwashing. And this is why the Americans confessed this. Well, actually, we know that and this is very well documented, the Chinese actually treated the captured prisoners really well, treated very, very well. There was absolutely, as far as we know, according to American reports, there was no physical torture. There was no mistreatment. They actually just, kind of talked with them. And then these people just came out with the truth because they saw what was going on. But they needed to do away with this. It was so delegitimating, especially in the Cold War period, that they created this mythology of brainwashing. And then they created an entire set of movies called, like the Manchurian Candidate, where somebody's brainwashed to go and kill, for the communists. And then the CIA started to believe it itself. So they created this program called MK Ultra, which was about brainwashing, prisoners so that they could, make them do what they wanted to and do assassination, all of that stuff. So they started to believe their own lies, and they did some weird experiments in MK Ultra, etc. All of this is to say that the ruling imperial elite, they start to believe their own lies. They get high on their own supply. And they constantly dip back to these lies. For example, I don't know if you recall, but in the early 2000s, there was a journalist called Jane Mayer, and she wrote a series of articles for the New Yorker called, Trip to the Dark Side. It was about the torture program, right? It was the torture in Guantanamo and Bagram, and how all of that, this is important. She says all of that was derived from a group of psychologists who had been reverse engineering the US program to resist torture, of the type that they would have received during brainwashing. Well, we know that there was no brainwashing and there was no torture. The Chinese didn't do that. They actually were very, very principled in the way that they treated POWs. But she says that, there was this thing called SEER, Search, Evasion, Rescue, Escape, which was a kind of a program that the airmen went through. And it was designed to train them to resist torture. So they get waterboarded and, mistreated, etc. And then she said these psychologists reverse engineered SEER and then used that back again against, the Afghan captives and tortured them. All nonsense. It's absolute nonsense because, as I said, the Chinese didn't brainwash and create psychic breakdown. And the SEER program was actually probably based on the US's own torture programs. During this 50s and 60s, it had a very, very active 60s, 70s, 80s. It had a very, very active torture program during Operation Phoenix during the Vietnam War. People would be tortured to death. They would have their genitals, removed, their, fingernails pulled out. They'd be thrown out of helicopters, mock shootings, all kinds of horrific chokings, all stabbings, all of these things, rape, gang rape, etc. All of that was done during the Vietnam War, during Operation Phoenix, which was a counterinsurgency program. And then Vietnam vets, after they finished their work in Vietnam, they went back and For example, in Chicago, there was this massive scandal where the police force was torturing suspects and subjecting to them the same kinds of tortures they had done, in Vietnam, um, and um, and and so on and so on. So all of this is part of the CIA playbook. The national security state has a long, long history of torture, going all the way back really to the witch hunts and the Inquisition. But certainly during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they had their own torture manuals. One of them is called the Kubark Manual. So they had this long history of torture. But then this New York Times reporter, Jane Mayer, says, oh, we didn't know how to torture, so we had to reverse engineer how to resist torture that was originally done to us by the Chinese. And in so doing, it's like, we may have done something bad, but it was really Chinese. Chinese are to blame for this. So she spread that myth, or the New York Times took her writings and spread that myth. And next thing you know, it's like, Bagram and Guantanamo is blamed on the Chinese, right? So this is how the propaganda works. It's a long, intricate stream of narrative manufacture, but it's used all the time, to distance oneself from the violence and the horrific iniquities of empire, and the other way to always make yourself feel like you're in the right and you're doing the right thing. It's playing on this very, very deep need on the denizens of the imperial core to feel good about themselves, even as they know that they're doing horrific things, that they are, even as we speak, facilitating the genocide of the Palestinians.
Well, I'm glad you just said that. What is going on? Because we've had a blackout now of what is actually going on with the Palestinians and the Israelis. And also we had a complete blackout of the massive amounts of weapons and troop deployments that the United States, the UK, and the Western world are transporting to that region. Could that be in preparation for an attack on Iran?
I think that's very, very likely. I think that the U.S. Is seeking to, or strongly considering an attack on Iran, as it is considering or escalating to an attack on Venezuela. Once again, going after what they think are lower hanging fruit, using their attack dog, Israel. Israel is the attack dog of the United States. There are people who think that, the Israeli lobby controls the U.S. government, etc., etc. No, it's the other way around. Israel is the attack dog. Biden said, if Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. Okay, and some people say, well, Israel is subcontract. It is not even a subcontractor, because a subcontractor brings their own tools. Okay, the U.S. gives all the tools to Israel. It's all Israeli. It's all U.S. weaponry, or German weaponry, or Canadian weaponry, or French weaponry. It's the West that is giving all the weaponry to Israel to conduct this genocide, which has actually been going on for 70 years now, but it entered into a very, very acute phase in the last 2 years. And the denizens of the global West are having a really, really hard time first seeing for the first time what genocide looks like, although it's been genocide all the way through. The empire has always been genocidal. It's genocides all the way down, genocides all around. Everywhere you look, in the global South, in the colonies, it's all been genocide, and also on the United States itself, it's been genocidal right from the beginning. But for the first time in their lives, they're starting to see what a live stream genocide looks like. And so they feel this deep need to disown it. And so they want to say, it's just Israel. It's Israel is doing that. And if we only punished Israel and stopped AIPAC from, bribing our politicians, everything would be well. No, the bribery that AIPAC is giving to U.S. politicians is a tribute that U.S. politicians are exacting from them. And if they wanted to stop it, they would stop it the next day. If it ever got out of hand, they would just throw FARA, violations against every single one of those agents, and it would be over an instant. But it's because it is doing the U.S. agenda. It's doing the agenda of the West, of Germany, of Canada, of France, that this genocide is happening. And so this is why the global north has to put pressure on their own governments to stop it, to stop funding and enabling and supplying the genocide. But all of this is because Israel is the attack dog that is going to move on. As we can see, it's essentially doing the agenda that was planned out by the neocons, taking out all the countries in West Asia or the Middle East that the neocons don't want. So we're talking about Syria, Lebanon. Iran was the last on the list of 7 countries that the neocons had wanted to attack. And they knocked out Libya, they knocked out, all the other countries. And now they're finally coming for Iran. The thing is that Iran is not going to be an easy capture. It's not low-hanging fruit. First thing to know is that the U.S. was not able to prevail in Afghanistan, and part of the reason why it was not able to prevail is Afghanistan is a very, very large country, and secondly, it's a very, very mountainous country. Well, Iran is 3.8 times larger than Afghanistan, and it is about as mountainous as Afghanistan is. So already, from a pure kind of geostrategic standpoint or geographic standpoint, it is not going to be an easy. It's not going to be a cakewalk, although they always think it's going to be a cakewalk. And then the other thing is that the U.S. and Israel, by attacking Iran, they've unified the country and prepared it for resistance. And the third thing is that Iran and Russia and China are the pillars of the global South, of the rising multipolar world. And I think that they will support each other. They will give each other the necessary support in order to sustain themselves. Certainly, I think there are all kinds of technology support that is already happening.
A source told me that cargo planes from the Russian Federation have been landing constantly at some of the air bases in Iran, and also that there are Chinese advisors that have come with equipment and radars to help integrate Iran's air defense systems and to help them technologically. And a lot of people don't know that the anti-ship missile that Iran used to use was a version of a Chinese CO-8 missile that the Chinese gave to them. And now, from what I've heard, that the Chinese has given them upgraded versions of those missiles and stuff to protect all the sea lanes in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. So with that said, this same person told me that they got it from the horse's mouth that if the U.S. and Israel attacks Iran, that Iran will not hold punches this time, that they will hit hard and they will knock down the refueling airplanes that the British, remember the British was involved quietly too with the refueling airplanes and also feeding intelligence. So they said Iran says if it happens this time, they're gonna hit hard because they feel that the Republic and the government would be at risk.
Yeah, I think they're going to hit much, much harder. I think before, in the 12-day war, Iran was still very, very restrained. They used only old weaponry, old missile systems, and still they were able to break through 6 layers of American and Israeli air defenses, the most advanced air defenses in the planet. They were able to break through with their drones and relatively unsophisticated missiles. So they've shown that they can hit back hard. And I think that the U.S. has not taken that into consideration. The other thing, remember, is that U.S. depleted its magazine of anti-ballistic systems, and so this is probably the reason why they wanted a pause, because they wanted to reload the magazine. Mm-hmm. But once again, there's some key asymmetrical considerations that we have to think about. Iran is about 90 times larger than Israel. Israel is a tiny, tiny country. And if the Iranians don't hold back and really kind of accelerate, then they can saturate Israel with, with attacks. Whereas for Israel to attack Iran, Iran can simply disperse. As I said, it's almost 4 times the size of Afghanistan, with endless mountains, and a huge area into which it can disperse. So already from a geographic standpoint, that is a very, very bad battle to engage in. But also, we know that Iran has advanced missile systems. They have their own technology. They're also capable of integrating with, as you pointed out, other systems, including Chinese and Russian. And these days, it's all integrated systems. It's all, what they call a kill chain, but you connect the radar to, the decision systems, to the weapon platforms, etc. They're capable of doing that. They're also capable, as we see, of jamming electronic signals, of making the electronic landscape very, very hard to penetrate. And yes, they could be capable of taking down refueling planes. So this is not going to be an easy battle for Israel or the United States. The Israeli war doctrine is something called, it comes out of the Yom Kippur War. If you remember, in 1972, Israel went to war against Syria and Egypt. And one of the ways that it did this is that it immediately attacked the capitals of both Syria and Egypt. That is, it attacked Cairo and Damascus. Initially, in the initial engagements, the Israeli military was being wiped out. But the U.S. had this plan called Nickel Grass. They, resupplied Israel, and then next thing you know, the Israelis were counterattacking, but in particular, the counterattack in the rear, in particular, attacking the capitals of Syria and Egypt, Damascus and Cairo. And this is the battle doctrine that the U.S. adopted. It's called air-land battle, which essentially is when you have an engagement, you do a kind of a shock and awe attack against the rear, and you take out command and control. And we saw this, for example, in the Iraq War. This was, the shock and awe in Iraq 1 and 2. This was the U.S. plan. The thing is, the counterparties are wise to this, and so they can also do a shock and awe. They can attack, the decision centers. They can attack the rear, and in the case of Iran, they can disperse much wider in a way that Israel simply just doesn't have that capacity because it's such a small region.
Someone, I think I lost it here, but someone said it's, oh, here it is. Joel Bradford says, when Israel starts to lose again to Iran, they will resort to nuclear weapons. Well, if they did that, then Pakistan already said that the use of a nuclear weapon against Iran would constitute a strike against Pakistan, and Pakistan is a huge nuclear power, and Iran could use what nuclear fuel that it has to quickly constitute nuclear weapons to strike back. And Israel is only the size of the state of New Jersey, so it would not, and they would not even have to use nuclear weapons to wipe out the state of Israel, especially if they have something similar to Russia's weapon. What is it called? Hazelnut, the hazelnut weapon that hits like a nuclear weapon. So they wouldn't even have to do that. But I want to, because I know the time is limited, I want to go to some. What do you think about Malawi in Africa now saying that no raw materials will leave Malawi without being refined in Malawi, giving more jobs to the Malawian people, bringing industry and investment to Malawi itself? And we see that this is a trend that is spreading across Africa, and we see as independence and true independence spread, we see the influx of more terrorism. And one of the people on here ask me to go along with that. Fovo says, Rashid, I'm curious, what do you think about Madagascar's coup? Let us know sometime. So What do you think about what Malawi and the Sahel nations are doing and what just transpired in Madagascar?
Okay, yeah. So the first thing is this is actually a good development. Remember, the way that colonialism and imperialism works is that it uses the global south as a source of raw materials, and it extracts them at a pittance, and then it takes them to somewhere else, and then it processes them, and that way the value added, which is really comes from the processing, is always accrues to the corporations of the global north. When you indigenize that processing, you move up the value chain, and therefore it allows the country to hold to contain more of the wealth. I mean, it applies for everything, not just minerals and raw earth elements, but even things like chocolate. If you produce the chocolate and you process it there, you're going to get a much larger amount of the value than if you were simply to export cocoa beans. So that is important, and this is actually what China has been doing all around Africa and the global south. It's been helping these countries build out their infrastructure and then their manufacturing capacity so that they can move up the value chain inside their own country. This is very, very important. And so Malawi is important because that it's doing that, but it has significant deposits of rare earth elements as well as other transitional metals and coal and minerals. And so it's a very, very important resource extraction area. It has a lot of resources that are potentially extractable, and it wants to indigenize the supply chain and processing, which is good. And it is also being subjected to undermining, because anytime you try and take sovereignty of your own national wealth, then the imperial powers try and undermine you. So that's the dynamic that is actually going on right now. As for Madagascar, that is yet another color revolution. It's essentially as the empire is crumbling, it's becoming more and more desperate, and you can see that it's waging color revolution all around the country, all around the countries of the world. And then what you see is, I mean, these days they call them the Gen Z revolutions, but essentially they are supported by the U.S. Imperial Center. They're funded by the NED or USAID or other U.S. organizations, and almost invariably they put in or they install a U.S. quisling, and we see this. I mean, another example, for example, is Nepal. That was another U.S. instigated color revolution.
Last question, but before I go to the last question, Flying Crocodile, you said ereshnik. That's what it means in Russian, hazel tree or hazelnut. So that's what I was saying. The same thing that you put up there. But last question, with America debt officially topping $38 trillion, no manufacturing, or little to no manufacturing, more nations leaving the dollar, nations selling their dollar assets, and we see rising poles of power and enraged and inflamed leadership of the U.S. and the West not understanding this. Where do you think the U.S. empire will be, the British Empire will be, because London and Washington are connected so tight, economically, politically, geopolitically, and militarily? What do you think that this will be in the next 5 years as more nations become truly sovereign and independent away from the dollar, the pound, the euro? And that means no buying U.S., UK, or EU debt.
Yeah, so the city of London has been around for almost 1,000 years. It's actually a sovereign region inside London itself. The Queen cannot enter the city of London without permission from the the authorities of the City of London. But this is the center of Western global capital, and then it's tied in deeply with Wall Street and Silicon Valley and the U.S. centers of power. So this is what the ruling elite, they are seeing their global economic empire collapse around them. And it's been a long process. In some sense, it's been a 500-year process, but more recently, it's been a 50-year process of deindustrialization. Now, in order to understand the dynamic that's going on, you have to think of the game of Monopoly. Have you ever played Monopoly?
Yes.
If you play the game Monopoly, eventually what happens?
You either win or you go broke.
You either win or you go broke. And what does winning mean?
That means controlling all of the land spaces, the valuable land spaces, and grabbing up a lot of the money that's available.
Yeah, exactly. So you end up with a monopoly. That's why the game is called Monopoly, right? And this is essentially the same thing that happens with capitalist markets. Essentially, you get monopolies. You play the game. Initially, there's competition, and that competition is quote unquote supposedly effective, makes corporations more competitive and offer better products, etc. But eventually, one company will start to get a monopoly. And when it gets monopoly, it does two things. It gouges because it can, because it has the monopoly. And secondly, it, pardon my French, enshittifies everything. It doesn't give you anything that's useful or necessary. It just kind of pretends and degrades everything. And then you get less and less for more, and you have to pay more and more for it. And at the same time, because you're working inside a system of monopoly corporations, they also drive down your wages. So they have monopoly over, the employment as well. So they drive down your wages, and pretty soon you're at the point where you cannot afford anything. At the same time, the monopoly corporation controls the entire economy, or the sector of the economy. And at that point, you have severe contradictions. And the way to resolve that contradiction is to financialize. So monopoly corporations will financialize. They move into the financial sector. What does that mean? Well, it means that real estate companies buy up all the housing, and then they gouge you for rents. It means that Ford Motor Company or GM or whatever makes more money selling loans than it does actually making cars. In fact, it's really a financial company masquerading as a car manufacturing company. But the manufacturing is just a pretext to sell you the loan. In fact, these days, if you order a burrito on DoorDash, they will offer you, 4 easy installments to pay it with. And that tells you two things. One is that, once again, they would like to financialize everything. They don't want to go from money to commodities to more money. They just want to go from money to more money. They want to transition from money making a claim to more money. If they could, they would wipe out the person who's actually, rolling the burrito, when they would just take the, offer you the, the option to financialize for nothing in return. But they still go through the pretext of that. But the other thing that it tells us is that the conditions of the working class are so immiserated that even, a burrito, which now these days costs $20, you can't afford it. So you have to pay it on installment. You have to defer payment into the future. And that explains to you the dynamic of, general dynamic of both the, pardon my French again, enshittification, the gouging, but also the immiseration that happens all around. Okay, so when you have that system, how do you manage that contradiction? Well, at a certain point, the contradiction becomes so extreme that you either have a revolution, or the monopoly corporation expands overseas, and this is what we call imperialism. Or if that doesn't work because there are no easy, resources to appropriate and colonize, then it just explodes into outright war. And so that's the defibrillator for, the gross obese capitalist uncle. When his heart goes out, when it goes into fibrillation, use the defibrillator, which is world war. And so this is one of the reasons why we're at this point. So people are saying, well, everybody's de-dollarizing, it's all in gold. All of these things are symptoms of, these are the kind of morbid symptoms of a system that is breaking down. And by the way, you said that we're $38 trillion in debt. It's not 38 trillion, it's 138 trillion if you do the accrual method. It's only if you do cash accounting, which is nonsense, because the IRS won't let you do a cash accounting if you're over a few million. But to be $38 trillion in debt and to use cash accounting is nonsense. So it's actually $138 trillion that we are in debt. Now, we have paid that debt off, through this kind of sleight of hand, which is that we just print money. We print money. Why do we print money? Because we are the global reserve currency. It's a little bit like, again, coming back to the game of Monopoly. When you play the game of Monopoly, you have somebody who hands out money to other people, and you have to keep the money supply constant in order for the actual transactions to happen. Well, the US gets to do that, and the reason why it gets to do that, it has this thing called the petrodollar, that it has made an agreement with the petrostates, or specifically Saudi Arabia, that oil has to be priced in dollars, and that transactions have to be done in dollars. So then that creates a demand for dollars, which then the US gets to print at will. In other words, very simply, the US gets to take stuff from other countries, get commodities, and instead it just gives them tiny slips of paper, because these slips of paper are used for other things as well, other transactions. Well, that system is breaking down. So countries are starting to de-dollarize. They're starting to do transactions in their own currency, swaps, etc. And so then there's less and less demand for the dollar. And so then this kind of unlimited credit card that the United States has had for decades, where it simply gives paper in exchange for real things, for things of real value, that system is also breaking down as well. And so under those circumstances, the US wants to exert more force, levy sanctions, try and turn countries against China, which is rising and industrializing, and it wants to reindustrialize. But that industrialization horse has already left the barn. Once you deindustrialize, you also deskill and you financialize. You cannot turn that current back. And so then because of that, and because of all the other contradictions that are coming to the fore, the real danger is to use the defibrillator, is to use war as a way of restarting the economy. So this is why we're at such a dangerous, confusing, and really risky moment. And this is why we really have to put our shoulders to the wheel to prevent our countries from going to war, from escalating to yet further wars, as well as to prevent the ongoing genocide. And in order to prevent that, one of the first things we need good information. And we also need to kind of degauss our brains and keep ourselves from being indoctrinated, because that's where the war starts. The violence starts with the assumption. It's the information war, which is the pre-kinetic dimension of kinetic war, that before they drop the bombs, they drop the narratives, and they try and shoot down. They try and create a no-think zone, just as they try and create a no-fly zone. And so this is the moment at which everybody who's listening, but and anybody who is of conscience, they have to start thinking critically, ask themselves, how am I being indoctrinated? How am I being propagandized? How is my consent being manufactured for war? And once you start asking those questions, then you have to ask yourself, how can I prevent this escalation to war?
Again, everybody, I told you, if there's 5 guys better than him, you name them. I can't name them. KJ is awesome when it comes to this geopolitical stuff, and that's why I'm always asking him things, trying to pick his brain. Thank you so much, KJ, and I'm going to send you a copy of the video just as soon as the show is over. Thank you from the depth of my soul to the bottom of my heart, man. You are awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rashid. And thank you for what you are doing, getting the truth out there and informing people about what they really need to know and be thinking about.
And be blessed. And I'll talk to you shortly.
Talk to you soon.
Flying Crocodile 46, thank you for the $10 super chat. And I always say this before we go off. Remember to do right by others, not because there's some material gain or because there's some accolades to be had after this. Do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember, God Almighty is watching you. As my late mother would always say, God sits high, but he looks low. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth and who loves freedom just as in equality. But know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true. But remember this, more than anything else, to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces. We're out of here. Peace.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost.